The From Busy to Rich podcast helps financial advisors grow their businesses beyond the products they sell and the assets they manage, increase profitability, and reclaim their time by providing strategies and insights that will not only change your life, but practice.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to From Busy to Rich. Your co-host, Justin Lakin, and with me, as always, Wes Young. And we're joined by a special guest who likely will need no introduction, but Wes, just for the sake of those that are listening and aren't able to actually see who's here with us, if you could give us a brief introduction to who's here with us today and then where we're going.
Absolutely. Well, you guys know Carl Richardson. He's been on the show before and is back on today. And we've got some fun stuff to talk about here. Carl, thanks so much for being back with us.
Wes, thanks for having me. Justin, it's good to be here.
We never have a shortage of things to talk about, especially to this group. You know, it's all entrepreneurs, business owners that are most of them in the financial planning industry and want to move in the direction where they're doing more transformational work and less transactional drive, where it's more about tapping into the person that you're meetings with story instead of your stuff. And so it's always a pleasure. And I got your most recent book that it is very unique in the way that you wrote it. And I'd love to jump in with just maybe a little bit of what led you to this particular piece of work that you created. And I know right in the introduction, what I loved is you said, this isn't a book, it's a conversation grenade. And having spent some time in it and having it on my coffee table, I can tell you that it is. But I'd love your kind of thoughts around that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I mean, I have to admit, I have a really hard time not asking a question. So I'm going to ask it and you can tell me if you want to save it for later.
Sure.
That idea of their story versus your stuff is super interesting to me. I think it's a real challenge for even the best advisors I've met to keep your values off other people's plans and realizing that your very presence in the room will change the nature of the conversation because people are going to give you the sort of answer. So much of financial advice, financial planning is mimetic, meaning we're just mimicking what we saw on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
And the very nature of you being in the room makes it, I guess all I'm saying is that is really hard work to get to get your stuff out of the way and really be devoted to somebody else's story because it means ceding control. It's just really hard work. And I just applaud you for being that pointed about it because I don't think it's something we realize. I mean, this is the last thing I'll say about it. I often wonder if our need for clean, pristine plan is getting in the way of clients living and enjoying their lives. Right? Our need for goals, our need for plans, our need for precision, our need for calculations is actually getting in the way of them because we're saying, when you get there, when you get there, when you get there. And we're actually feeding that monster of I'll be happy when.
Yes.
Because we need a plan. Because that's what we do, right?
How long do I have to talk until we can get to my stuff, right? That's what's living in the heads of a lot of people that are in our industry.
Yeah, it's really hard. Anyway, thanks for doing that. I'll answer your question real quickly. Years ago, I started trying to communicate using a simple visual, and it was an act of desperation. And I'm sure many of your listeners would relate. You think you're really good at explaining something. You're sitting across the table from really smart, successful people, and you're just getting blank stares. And it dawns on you that these are smart, successful people, and their blank stares are not their fault. They're your fault. Right? And you have this moment where you're like, oh no. And I one day stood up at the whiteboard for the first time in one of those meetings. I remember who it was even, and was like, no, like this, and tried out of an act of like a last ditch effort. And I drew something and they were like, oh, I get it now. And I remember being sort of addicted to that feeling, like being like, oh, that's interesting. So I started doing them for a newspaper, like long story short, started doing them for a newspaper that a few people read. And then I started getting these emails.
Which was the New York Times, right? I just want to point that out. A couple people read that one. Right?
Yeah. And I started getting these emails that would say, hey, I took a screenshot of that sketch, I printed it and I put it on our bulletin board in our break room. And then to my great disappointment, the email never went on to say like I'm so impressed by their striking visuals or the art. It was never about the art. But what would always follow would be I can't tell you how many conversations that's led to. I have it taped to my fridge. My daughter asked me about it. Like I have it in my break room. I saw two employees gathered around. So it was always this like it starts conversations. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So it had been 11 years since my last book, and I was really committed to not writing another one. And I started thinking like, well, gosh, we need more conversations about money. And not the financial pornography CNBC version, but like the things that actually matter. And then I thought there's something kind of magic about a really, approachable, unpretentious, like paperback. They wanted it to be hardback. I was like, no, I want it to be soft cover. I want it to feel like something that you wouldn't have a problem tearing a page out of. You wouldn't have a problem dog earing, like marking up. So I want it to be like an unpretentious coffee table book that you would just be like, "Hey, did you like?" And the whole point, the entire point, is to start conversations. I don't really care about the book. I just care about what we're doing
Yes.
right now, and I care about seeing how many of those we can start out in the world. So that's what the book's for.
I want to ask you a question before we dive into some of these because you said something a second ago. You said I was really committed to not writing another book,
Yeah,
and what's in that? Tell me about that.
yeah. Um, there's a whole thing that goes on when. I mean, it doesn't have to go on. I'm sure it doesn't go on. Like a more enlightened, more mature person, it probably doesn't happen to them. But to me, you get immediately plugged into a big giant comparison machine. Like how's the book selling? How many reviews does it have? What, did the New York Times review it? Did you make a bestseller list? And I didn't do a great job of handling that with the first two books. Like I can tell you when Behavior Gap came out, I found out that Amazon updates the book ranking number every hour. And the reason I know that is because the first 36 hours, I didn't love my inability to I started to lose a little bit of focus on what mattered
Yeah.
and got distracted by what didn't matter. And so I was like, you know what? I just, if you can't handle the heat, stay out of the kitchen. So I was just sort of like, maybe that's not for me. And then about the same time, I've always written largely by processing audio. Like and it used to just be I would do that using an audio file and I would store it on my computer and listen to it. And then I've been doing that for years, and the team found them, and they were like, "Hey, there's this new thing called podcasts. Could we put those up?" And this was years and years ago when it was new. Like, could we put those up? And I was like, "I don't want to start a podcast." And they started putting them up, and I would started getting notes from people like, "Hey, I love your podcast." And I would reply like, "I don't have a podcast." And they're like, "Look, I don't care what you call it, but could you put it on iTunes, back in the day, so I could listen to it on the way home?" So it was about that same time where I was like, maybe I never need to write another book. Maybe I can just focus on audio and video, and quite enjoying that, like the 50 Fires project and
Yeah.
the work I do with Michael Kitsis and my own Behavior Gap Radio. Quite enjoy it, but there's something cool about. So those two factors. One, I feel like I've done a much better job this time. I haven't really gotten caught up in what the book means. Like, sorry, in the comparative nature of the book. I'm just like I'm here for the conversation. But I wasn't sure I could pull that off again because of what it did to me in terms of like starting to care about things that I really didn't care
Yeah.
about.
Hey, how you doing? Is everything okay so far?
Everything's
This-
great. People ask me the same question, how's the book doing? And I always am like, based on the quality of the conversations I'm having, I think the book's doing exactly what it was intended to do.
And for those of you who don't have it yet, I mean, what I would recommend is you definitely get it. And everybody listens differently. They consume stuff differently. I would get this in both forms, the audio, because there's some stuff in the audio that's a secret.
Oh, have you listened to the audio?
Yeah,
It was super fun. So, like
Oh.
I was at first we weren't going to do. The publisher was like, just leave the sketches out, and I was like, no, no, no. I used to do this on NPR all the time, like art on the radio we called it back then with Marketplace Money, and I was like, and then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to start throwing in little secret tidbits,
Yeah.
little behind the scenes stories. Like, so there's some stuff in the audio that's not in the normal book.
Yeah, no, it's cool to have that, and then also have the actual book. And this is good in a lot of ways, especially for the role that most of our listeners are in, because you can use this one as just a way to continue to connect yourself with story, and instead of stuff you get bombarded with stuff. Everybody in our industry does product, strategy, process, idea, and that we are not bombarded with tapping into the stories that are really going on in us. And so this is one of those. It's almost I don't want to call it a devotional, but it can kind of be a devotional in a sense, because it helps you just look at if you just opened one a day in the morning before you jumped in, you would be better in your client meetings and with people all around you, just navigating story, because you got a great sketch that tells a lot of story, and then you talk about it afterwards. And the second way it's good is the holidays. Of course, now we're recording this and they've come and gone, but they'll be back again. Is or you have friends over for dinner or something like that, and this is out, and I'd like to open it to a page and just have it out there, because everybody's like, somebody, well, what's this? And I said, well, it's fascinating. I said, tell you what, let's play. Let's play. And we'll bring it up. So like this one. How's that impacted you? You talk about just a different conversation all of a sudden from what normally people may go to. So I'd love to jump into some of these with you, brother. Is there one that, because you got a bunch of gold in here, is there one in particular, or a one? I know they're all really deep and meaningful, every one that I've read, that you would say you hear more people come to you and say, man, this one, or that has sparked more interesting conversation, that just is a greatest hit, if you will.
I've been actually quite surprised at how many people, and maybe it's because it's first, but how many people want to talk about money equals feelings, because it's the first one, and I did that very intentionally, and the reason for that was to just really like kind of shock people out of like, I'm not reading a personal finance book here. And it happens to be my editor at the New York Times, Ron Lieber's favorite sketch, which I always thought was really interesting. That's interesting to me because people, I think this is the reason that it's so hard for us to have conversations about money, is because if we were taught anything about it, we're taught that it's comes from the math department. It's a spreadsheet and calculator. And then we find ourselves like, I just opened the American Express bill. Why are we fighting? Right? Even a balance sheet. It's been really interesting to me. Like, a balance sheet seems as benign as possible. It's just a statement of fact. It's a snapshot in time. And every line, I've often said that a balance sheet is a work of nonfiction filled with fictional stories, right? Because every line on that balance sheet, somebody made a decision to put it there. And sometimes, especially if you're dealing with a spouse or partner, sometimes there was disagreement about whether. And so if it's on the balance sheet and it's a loss, you've got somebody saying, I told you that was a bad idea, right? If it's on the balance sheet and it's a gain, you might have somebody saying, I told you we should have bought twice as much. Like, every single line on that balance sheet. And so money equals feelings is just sort of this shot across the bow to be like, hey, go into these discussions realizing that you're going to be surprised. It's like grabbing an electric fence that you didn't know was electric. Like, it's one thing to bump up against electric fence when you're out working on electric fences. That's one thing. But if you don't know and you grab one, and I've made that mistake, it's quite a shock. So I love that one. And then the other one that was
Literally a shock.
yeah, exactly. And then the other one that was been fun for me was number 7. It's money isn't just math. It's, for those of you just listening, there's 2 images. One is just a straight line, and it's labeled advice from an algorithm. So it's just a straight line, advice from an algorithm. And the other one is a straight line that then goes into like a giant ball of yarn and then comes out. So it's all messy in the middle. And that one's labeled real life. And the reason this was interesting to me is I drew that probably 10 years ago, back during the robo advice threat, fear that we all faced. And I didn't know if it was still, I thought, man, maybe this is too simplistic. Maybe it doesn't work anymore and I'm committed to not using the words AI anymore. I think we should be calling it artificial intelligence, just to remind ourselves of what it stands for. And so I wrote the essay, I worked on the essay, and I thought, man, this would be kind of fun. I'll go chat with an AI tool about this essay. And I asked it, like, is this still important? Am I still getting this right? And of course, I've trained AI to tell me exactly what I want it to tell me. So it told me it was a great idea. But there's one line in here: algorithms can analyze patterns brilliantly, but they can't feel the anxiety of a major investment decision, or the pride of achieving a financial goal, or the responsibility of providing for a family. Your most powerful financial tool isn't math. It's your humanity. So that one's been brought up a lot. And that was a piece of sort of writing that I was like, man, this is why you write books,
Yeah.
to work out nuance and edge case and write something you're proud of.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to From Busy to Rich. If you're listening and something sparks a question or you just want to explore these ideas further, visit us at wesyounglive.com or email us at info@wesyounglive.com. You'll find free resources, tools, and ways to get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
One of them that really resonated with me recently for some things that we're working on internally, the whole alignment idea, and because you have one of the best definitions of meaningful financial planning or real financial planning is about the alignment of the use of capital, time, talent, energy, attention with what you really care about. And
Yeah.
this breaks down into so many areas, and the section that you have in the book on this was just a great reminder for me, and it almost made me laugh a little bit. Our organization, as we've grown, I determined in my quarterly strategic coach that I was at, it just kind of smacked me in the face that I was way out of alignment, and it was because I had a lot of executive assistants that are still a part of our organization. By the way, they're not gone; they're here, but they were good at something that I saw as an opportunity to align with the direction of where we wanted to go. And I thought,
Mm.
this is great. And they liked it. They were good at it, gave them energy. And so I said, hey, you want to try this on? And they did love it. And they did move in the direction. It did help. What I didn't realize is there was a whole lot of executive assistant things that were no longer their responsibility, and I was doing them. And
Mhm.
that did not align with my enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning that I want in
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
And I was like, how did that happen? There's thoughts around any of that?
Yeah, I just think that it's really easy for us to forget, and I think we will run, will avoid anything that will remind us or show us our inauthentic behavior, right? Like, you don't, when you're behaving in a way that isn't aligned with what's actually important to you. And I think of this, one of those places is time. I mean, listener, like people listening, like just hit pause for a second, go to your settings in your iPhone and pull up screen time. And the moment I suggest it, you're probably having a feeling, the same feeling I'm having, which is nah, it's I'm good. I'm fine with the phone. Like it's not a problem. But boy, the data shows a different story. And we run from those reminders because they're exposing inauthentic behavior. And I kind of feel like, to the degree that we can, in terms of you know our own self, like just our health, even, we should design ways to be purposely exposed to inauthentic behavior so that we can make corrections. And I think that's sort of what you're pointing to, of like, if I can have a plan, whatever that looks like to me, that will remind me of what I said when I was thinking clearly. And then I realized the goal of the plan is not to be precisely correct. The goal of the plan is not to pretend like it was prophecy or a perfect model of the future. The goal was of the plan is to give me an easy way to remember when I'm off track.
Yeah.
Like, and so in other words, we have to start, like, and financial planners, we need to get better at any sort of plan. We need to get better at this idea of, like, you make the plan and then you actively look for disconfirming evidence, right? You actively start looking for the ways you are wrong, because that wrongness is information that will allow you to course correct. And of course you were going to be wrong. You couldn't have expected it any other way. So rather than thinking like wrongness shows up, that equals failure, shame, blame, I'm a terrible planner, I'm embarrassed to talk to my clients, you say, no, wrong. Wow, what great information. Turns out you don't want to own a sailboat. You didn't like that sailing trip.
Yes.
Let's try something else, right? So I think adopting a posture where we start learning to be okay with information showing up so we can course correct is really important. And that's the point of a plan.
And I love the realities that your tastes change as you go through life. In fact, I don't know if you've read the book From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks,
Not yet,
but
but I've heard about it.
fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating book. And he's a behavioral psychologist
Yep.
that has done a lot of cool stuff and his art and science of happiness. He's got a lot of cool stuff on happiness and what that really means. But the book Strength to Strength talks about these two curves that we have in our lives, and one of them is when we're, I don't know, he says the data points to that somewhere before the age of 40 you have a lot of crystallized, fluid intelligence. So you can collect a lot of dots, you can learn things pretty quickly. And a lot of times in our business, people got ahead by running faster, working harder, turning it up. They could almost grind a little more. And then they hit this other side of the curve that nobody tells them is coming. And it's the crystallized intelligence where nobody but you, sometime after that age, is going to notice it. But you're still doing it because you think it's who you are and what you should be doing because it's what got you accolade or what you thought you wanted. And maybe you did at that time, but you don't like it as much anymore. But you're still
Yeah.
doing it and you inherited it from a younger, different version of yourself. And the crystallized intelligence curve, you have a bunch to give, but you give it a different way. He calls it going from cowboy to coach. If you aren't able to get in that coach mode and do it different, you're not gonna like it. And I think when we don't do what you're talking about, which is that realignment of all these things that we have in our the four sources of capital, the money, energy, time, attention, with what you really care about, really asking yourself, what do I really care about? Not what the 3 month ago version of me cares about, but me now. And so I'd love to explore your thoughts on kind of those curves and your own observations of what you've experienced.
I think the idea, it's quite, I mean, sometimes when I'm talking to myself, I'd never say this to anybody else, but like it's quite cute that I thought I knew what I wanted. Like it's so interesting to me that the reality is we're living and planning and making decisions in the face of irreducible uncertainty that you can't get rid of.
Yeah.
And that's because we live in a complex adaptive environment. And the only way to navigate a complex adaptive environment is to get really clear about where you are today and then solve for the next local optimum, right? Like, what's the next step? And the reason you take the next step is because I love to use Michael Kitces as a verb. You can Kitces things to death, like analyze them to death. And then there's becomes a certain point where new information is not going to help you make a better decision. You just need to act. And the moment you take a step, new information is going to become available that wasn't available at your prior step. And so I just think like understanding that as we go along in life, think of all the interconnected variables, our kids, the community we live in, the weather, markets, all of those interconnected variables are changing so fast that it the idea and a plan's important because it gives us a sense of direction. Like I know I want to go that way. So it's not like we throw planning out. It's just that we change what it feels like. It's not the plan, it's the process of planning. Because yeah, those then you get to this point where you're like, and yeah, I think to Arthur Brooks' work, which I've listened to a lot of his work, I just haven't read the book. If you can't figure out when you're no longer Luke Skywalker, right? Like when
Yeah.
you're no longer the hero, you need to become the guide. Like that's how you end up, in a lot of trouble. And we've seen this throughout history. Like if you were the honored for being the fastest hunter and then one day you were no longer the fastest, you had to figure out, and I'm finding this right now, it's so interesting. And I'm having lots of these conversations with 45 to 55-year olds who are saying, I've conquered out there. Right? Like I've built the business, but I don't know how to be here. And here could be my own house, could be my own heart, my own head. And if we can't figure that out, you end up in a lot of trouble. And so I think sometimes the hardest, this is the last bit I'll say about this one. There's this guy, Mark Twight, who's one of the greatest extreme alpinists to ever live. Like he did stuff 20 years ago, that 30 years ago, that's never been repeated. And he said the hardest climb he ever did was the one back down to the valley, sort of knowing he would never go back up again. And I think there's a lot there. And so we need to learn, like Chip Conley's work on the modern elder. But all this points to the same thing, independent of where you are in your in your life. It all points to the same thing, which is all models are wrong. Let's make ours useful
Yeah.
by letting it interact with the world learning where we were wrong, course correct. Don't hide from the course correction by scrolling Instagram or getting a TV dinner and watching football. Like, incorporate that information and make the change you want to.
One question that I've heard you ask a lot on the 50 Fires episodes, conversations that you have there, and I've been incorporating it in and just get amazing responses and reactions to. But is you ask the question, what job have you given your money? Would you give us, you're sitting in that chair asking that question, I don't know about how many times by this time, but a lot. What myriad of outcomes you see in response to that question?
Yeah, it's I really love that conversation. And my maybe my favorite one was with the writer and artist Austin Kleon, who wrote Steal Like an Artist. And it was a slightly different form of the question. I asked him if money were to come in, join us on this Zoom screen, right? Like there's a fourth thing that popped up and there's money. Like, what would you ask it? And his first answer was, whose lives have you made better and whose lives have you ruined? And I was like, wow, that's a really good question. And he said, no, no, no. You know what? What I'd really ask is, who has been able to handle you? So that was fascinating. And then I love to flip that around and say, okay, what would money ask you? Like, what would money say to you? And my version of that, which gets to your job, what the question, the jobs question is like, what job have you given money that it can't do, and what job have you given money that it can do? And my experience with like having journaling and thinking through, like, if money were in a chair sitting next to me and I was having a conversation with it, what would it say to me? I always have this vision of a super earnest but terribly disappointed golden retriever. Like disappointed in the way that only a golden retriever could be. And it would be saying essentially to me, like, I tried so hard, right? Like I tried those jobs, like the whole thing with happiness and love, self-esteem, freedom, safety, like all those jobs you gave me, I can't tell you how hard I tried to do them. And I just can't. Right? Like, turns out I'm a 0 and a 1 stored in the cloud. I just can't. Like, that's been my favorite version of that conversation.
The place I want to go and where we just kind of land the plane on this for today, and Justin, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. Around sketches as conversation tool. One of the things as we have observed hundreds of advisors in meetings, just the things they say, how they say it. And one of the things oftentimes when we're doing a kind of a wrap afterwards and we say, all right, this is what was awesome where you were in this piece of the story and you brought this in really well. This area, it wasn't anything was wrong with what you were saying, but you used so many words to say it that it filled up their emotional and just brain capacity to where that thing that you got to at the end, they were so out of gas. They couldn't get to that place by then. How would you say it if you could only say it in 2 minutes? And I don't want you to talk fast. And the things that they will cut out, and I use this for myself too, the things that I will cut out in this great, I think, very wonderful explanation of something that we're going to be hitting, all of a sudden it gets down to the meat. And what I love about the sketch and the simplicity of it is you can almost say, hey, I can use a lot of words to describe this, but this picture, like what do you see when you see it? And just putting that on a page and getting them to respond to that and engage with it and feel like they're in a conversation, not in a presentation, is so powerful. And just anything you want to add to that, I'd love you to respond on that.
I'll go ahead and I guess jump in here. Really, since the beginning of the conversation, I've had this imagery going through my mind. I don't know if you've seen that new Top Gun movie, Maverick. I love that scene, and this is really the entire conversation has kind of been replaying in my mind, where he finally gets the initial introduction to the crew that he's going to be training, the Top Gun, former Top Gun elite students, right, for this mission. And he walks up there and holds up the manual and he talks about the manual that they've been taught on. They're like, yeah, we know everything in and out of it. And he throws it in the trash. And he says, well, so does your enemy, right? Like, for us, it's very similar, right? Like, Good financial planners, you know the playbook. Ultimately, the difference in the movie, what they term as, it comes down to the pilot in the box. It comes down to the individual person and the value. And we're talking about story here, and recognizing that there's a balance there of like you can do the best planning in the world, but you can only know so much up to the current point in time. And you do the best you
Yeah.
can with that information. And then you move forward. There's got to be action because life is a series of hypotheses, right? Like I've got a hypothesis of what I think things are going to be like. Now I have to actually test that. And then I can come back and reevaluate and start refining that theory. And then how do I create that in a simple way that gets people to act and move forward? And that's where we talk about the sketches and trying to reduce
Mhm.
things down into something that anyone can digest and move forward with. And oftentimes that's yes, dreaming about future plans, but it's also looking back at your
Mhm.
past. There's a book by former Navy SEAL Eric that wrote on resilience, and one of the things that always stuck with me is too oftentimes how we move through in defining identity is we have an emotional experience. Out of that emotion, we create an action, and then from there, we define ourselves from that experience. Like I feel jealous, I reacted jealously, therefore I'm a jealous person. But the reality is your identity, your inherent value goes so much more beyond that. The story that you're in and the life that you want to live, the rich life and the things that you can add to those
Yeah.
components and to those stories and conversations. And if you flip that script, I've got this identified. I know who I am, what are important to me. I can look back and know where the areas of my life have been very valuable and exciting and want to create more of that in the future. Then I define the actions that will do it and the emotion follows.
I agree. And I think even like that Top Gun idea of throwing the manual away is, to me, that happens on a macro level, but I'm mostly curious about the micro level in a meeting with a client. Like, what if I just, I had an agenda, I had a plan, I had the manual, of course, but what if the only reason for that manual was to just open myself up to being open to, I call them the crunchy bits, like when I notice some emotional resonance, when a client says something, and instead of just skipping over it, I can say, whoa, 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 can I? And I found that the more I practice that, sometimes it's not even like a visible thing between clients. There's just a feeling, and you can just learn to lean into that a bit. And the reason it's scary is because it goes off the script. Like you're no longer on the manual, you're no longer on the agenda. But the reason to know the manual backwards and forwards is to give you the freedom to do that. To then say, "Hey, John, I noticed just a second ago, like something landed there." Because what we're really trying to do is give, back to your point earlier, Wes, like uncover for them this beautiful story that they've got inside them. And I don't even think it's really creating the story. I think it's largely rediscovering, brushing off the dust. The kindergarten teacher who said, "Put that silly thing away." The guy at university that said, "When are you going to get a real job?" The like learning to help them say you, and that could take years and years and years. But if that's the gift you end up giving a client, it's because you've gone off script, because there is no script. And I think that's super scary for us because it's so much easier just to stick to the story, the plan, the agenda. So I love that idea of just being like, if I had to sum up, like, what is the number one skill for real advice? It's curiosity, I think.
So good, brother. There is a great quote that we've kind of adapted that when I read your work here, it's full of it. And it is, we come into this business in a state of starry-eyed enthusiasm, then we educate ourselves to a place of sophisticated confusion, and
Right.
hopefully the best in the world emerge to the place of mature simplicity. And that what you have with this book and with the sketches and with the content around it is really just a work of beautiful mature simplicity. So appreciate you taking the time to write another book, even though you
Mm.
did not want to do it, right? But you got to the place where your taste changed, right? So man, any final words, Carl?
No, I mean, just a reminder that, like, look, this version of planning matters a lot, like, because it's about people's lives. And I know of I can't think of a time when it was more important, and it seems to be every day getting more important to be like, there's a crisis of meaning. and helping people make sense of their sense of meaning in the world is just such valuable work. So I just would say to your audience, like, please keep doing it. That the people need you. They don't need you for the investment advice per se. It's important. Of course it's important. They don't need you for the budgeting and the cash flow advice. Of course they do. Of course it's important. What they really need you for is the alignment of all that stuff with what really matters to them. So yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. Thanks, Wes. And we'll do it again.
Yeah, brother. Thank you so much. Guys, go get this book. And like I said, get the audio too, because it does have those extra little secret things in it. And get the other book and just put it on your table. Put it on your table in your office, put one on your table at home. And every day just check one out and have some experiments, run some experiments with it, where you're going to draw that one thing and you're going to talk about it with as many people as you possibly can, that one thing. So your money, reimagining wealth in 101 simple sketches. You guys go explore, go create.
Thanks for tuning in to From Busy to Rich. If something in today's episode sparked an idea or hit a nerve, don't keep it to yourself. Follow the show, share it with a friend, and let's keep building a community of advisors who want more. You can find more resources, tools, and free content at wesyounglive.com. We'll see you back here next time for more real conversations about building the life and business you really want.